Hey guys, tonight we take a journey through silence, through space, and through the mind of one of the most extraordinary thinkers in human history. You won't survive this if you're expecting explosions or heroes on horseback, because this story moves without footsteps, whispers instead of shouts, and carries weight not in muscles, but in ideas. So before you settle in, gently tap that like button and subscribe, only if this kind of storytelling truly speaks to you. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are small, but not fragile. The world around you is gray post-war and humming with the quiet chaos of ration books, tin roofs, and kettle whistles. In Oxford, the air smells faintly of chalk dust and coal fires. And you, Stephen William Hawking, watch it all with a kind of wry detachment, even as a child. You're not loud. You never have been. Other boys run punch-shout testosterone in motion. You, though, you watch. You ask questions like, why do things fall? Not in a panicked way, more like curiosity dropped into the still water of your mind. It's 1945. You're born on the 300th death anniversary of Galileo. It won't mean anything for years, but people will one day draw meaning from that, like it was destined. For now, you're just a skinny boy with a fondness for taking apart clocks, even if you never quite get them back together. Your father, Frank, is a parasitologist. He talks often of tropical diseases and digestive worms while chewing toast at breakfast. You learn early that the human body is a fragile, strange thing. Your mother, Isabel, reads you stories and teaches you to think sideways. She's brilliant, but always somehow outside the frame, like a thought that hasn't been fully spoken. You're the kind of child who once built a small computer from recycled telephone parts. It didn't work very well, but that's not the point. The point is that you tried. Even at 10, you're reaching for logic, like it's candy. At school, you're not top of your class. Not even close. Your handwriting's terrible. Your notes are lazy. But the teachers look at you with suspicion because there's something behind your eyes they can't quite pin down. You don't memorize. You infer. You shortcut through equations like a magician flipping a card. And when they tell you your math is wrong, it's only because they don't yet see the path you already took. You're called Einstein by your classmates, not as a compliment. It's teasing at first, a nickname laced with sarcasm. But secretly, you like it. You imagine yourself with a wild mop of white hair, unraveling the universe in a messy old lab. You don't love authority. You do love questions. Why does time move forward? What happens to light near a star? If the universe is expanding, what's it expanding into? Your brain feels like it's always running ahead of your body, like a dog on a leash that keeps jerking the collar. You're clumsy. You trip a lot. Your pen drops too often. But you're young, and no one thinks much of it yet, not even you. Maybe you're just awkward. Maybe it's growing pains. You ignore it because there are bigger things to think about, like what came before the Big Bang, or how to make a better paper airplane. You build tree houses with improvised pulley systems. You start a club with a few friends called the Model Railway Enthusiasts, which is mostly an excuse to build elaborate things no one else understands. You laugh easily back then. You even tell jokes about theoretical physics, though no one laughs with you yet. The truth is, you're lonely sometimes. Not from lack of love, but from lack of language. You think faster than you can speak. Ideas come out twisted or half-baked, and you sometimes wish people could just plug directly into your brain and see what you mean. At night, you stare at the ceiling and wonder if the stars are looking back. It's not a metaphor. You literally wonder. You wonder if maybe the universe is just waiting for someone to figure it out, like a puzzle lying patiently in space, daring someone to try. You don't yet know that someone will be you. One time, a teacher says, "Stephen, you'll never amount to anything if you don't stop daydreaming." You just smile. A soft, almost imperceptible smirk, because deep down, you know something they don't. Your childhood ends not with a bang, but with 1,000 small questions that never quite leave you. Why does time flow one way? What lies beyond the boundary of what we can see? And why does everyone else seem so content, not knowing you're still a boy, still waiting to grow into your name? But the silence inside you, it's already starting to echo with stars. You are older now, but not yet wise. Teenage, lean-limbed, and vaguely amused by the world. Your posture's too relaxed for a rebel, but you are one all the same, quietly defiant, privately skeptical, allergic to pomp. You breeze through the halls of St. Albans School like a boy, half present. Teachers try to get your attention, but you're already off somewhere else, somewhere mathematical, somewhere abstract, somewhere made entirely of what-if Latin. You tolerate it. Literature, you respect it. But math is music, and physics is myth. You fall in love with the shape of logic, with the way one idea folds cleanly into the next like origami. The satisfaction of symmetry, the seduction of clarity. Most of your classmates groan at equations. You dream in them. You don't talk much about feelings, not because you don't have them, but because they feel inefficient. Emotions are messy, unpredictable. But force, vectors. Linear motion, predictable, solvable, comforting. Somewhere deep down, even now you suspect that if you could just find the right equation, you could explain everything. Life, death, time, gravity, even loneliness. Especially loneliness. You walk home from school under dusky skies, hands in pockets, sometimes talking to yourself in whispers. If entropy always increases, if acceleration bends space, if, always the ifs, your handwriting is still bad, hilariously bad. Teachers complain that your equations look like they've been thrown across the page in a hurricane. You just smile again. If the answer is right, who cares about the form? People misunderstand you, not out of cruelty, just misalignment. You speak rarely, but when you do, it's usually to point out a contradiction in someone else's thinking. This does not win you friends. Your friends are few, but loyal. They like your dry jokes the way you can recite Monty Python before Monty Python even exists. You begin to recognize something inside yourself, a desire not just to learn, but to solve. And more than that, to uncover. Not to memorize what others have said about the universe, but to ask it yourself directly and wait for the answer to come echoing back. Oxford calls. You answer. At first you're nervous. You assume, as anyone would, that a place filled with geniuses must be daunting. But once you're there, you find that most of them are just well-ordinary. Bright, yes, but rigid, trained, tidy. You, on the other hand, are chaotic-inspired, late to lectures, prone to skipping entire steps in your calculations, because obviously it just follows. You get away with it. Mostly. You begin to specialize. Physics, cosmology, the edge of understanding itself, the parts of science where knowledge ends and mystery begins. where math becomes myth again. You argue with your tutors not disrespectfully, just relentlessly. You raise your hand and ask what came before time. You scribble diagrams of wormholes and spinning black stars on your margins. You fall asleep in class once because you were up all night trying to solve a theoretical problem that didn't even exist yet. When questioned about your performance, you respond with a calm shrug and a wry, "I suppose I'm just not particularly motivated by grades." You are, however, very motivated by curiosity. One afternoon, you and a friend decide to build a computer from scratch. It's clunky clattering made of bits of telephone relays and scrap metal. It's terrible. It crashes constantly, but it works barely. You call it the loose machine. No one quite understands what it's for. That doesn't bother you. You just like that it exists. The jokes continue. You tell them dryly, like a scientist explaining entropy at a dinner party. Did you hear about the neutron who walked into a bar? He asked the bartender, "How much for a drink?" The bartender said, "For you, no charge." Your friends groan. You grin. Somewhere during this time, your balance begins to wobble more noticeably. You trip over stairs you used to climb without thought. You drop things. Your voice wavers slightly. You ignore it. You ignore it for months. Because who has time to be fragile when the entire universe is opening its hands to you? One professor remarks, Stephen seems to only do work when it's absolutely necessary, and then produces work of astonishing brilliance. Another says, his exams were infuriating, he skipped steps, but they were always right. You don't feel brilliant. You feel amused, often tired, sometimes electric, always restless. You begin to feel that time is running out, but not in the way you'll come to know. More like an internal clock, ticking faster than others. You're racing towards something. You don't know what. There's a moment, small forgettable to anyone else, when you're walking across campus, and you feel your leg pause just slightly mid-stride. A hiccup of muscle. A flicker of something not quite right. You laugh it off. But the seed is planted. You read books on relativity and find comfort in the idea that time isn't linear. That maybe your own path will bend. That maybe you have longer than you think. And even if you don't, you're already dreaming beyond it. Because for you, the laws of the universe aren't just rules. They're poetry. And the equations. They're lullabies you hum beneath your breath. You're 21, and the world is opening just as your body begins to close. At first, it's a stumble, then another. You tell yourself it's nothing too much time hunched over books, too many late nights. Maybe you're just tired. Everyone's tired, but your fingers betray you next. They can't quite manage buttons. Pens slip. You fumble with shoelaces. You who once built machines from spare parts now struggle with your own limbs. It's funny at first. You joke about it with that same crooked grin. Maybe gravity's just stronger around me. But the laughter doesn't echo as far. Not anymore. Your friends start noticing. Jane notices. You fall down the stairs. You slur a word, then two. You find yourself staring at a spoon on the table like it's a puzzle. You begin walking like someone trying to remember how walking works. Still, you press forward. You're accepted into Cambridge to pursue your doctorate. A new universe of ideas awaits, but the walk across the quad feels longer each day. Your lectures blur into whispers. You begin to avoid mirrors. And then finally, inevitably, you go to the doctor. The tests are clinical. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with indifference. Electrodes, reflex hammers, more tests. They don't say much at first. You leave with more questions than answers. Then one day, they sit you down, and someone with a clipboard and rehearsed calm says it. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, motor neuron disease, no cure, life expectancy, 2 years, maybe. You blink. You nod. You do not cry. It's not denial. Not exactly. It's calculation. You catalog the information, fold it inward like a theorem. Something to be solved. Something to be endured. Not something to define you, but it follows you. Every step. Every glance from a friend too afraid to speak. Every phone call with a silence too heavy. You go home. You sit in your childhood room now, too quiet. Your parents avoid your gaze in the hall. They love you desperately, but they don't know what to say to a son with an expiration date. You begin to retreat and then collapse inward like a star losing its fusion. You start drifting from lectures. Your notebooks lie unopened. For weeks, maybe months, you feel yourself vanish into a kind of psychic fog, formless, weightless, pointless. If the universe is winding down, why resist it? You're not afraid of death. You're afraid of not mattering. And yet, through the stillness, something begins to press against you. Something stubborn, something burning. It begins with a dream. In it, you are floating in space, your limbs suspended, untethered, but your mind is loud. It rings with numbers, with light, with time. You wake up gasping and remember the feeling not a death but a flight. It's absurd, a cosmic joke. Your muscles are disintegrating, but your thoughts are growing clearer than ever. You go back to your work, slowly, stiffly. A paper here, a lecture there. You move through corridors with measured steps. You begin calculating black holes' singularities. You begin to see a reflection of yourself in the equations. Collapsing systems, points of infinite density. A friend asks you, "Why are you suddenly working so hard?" You answer simply, "Because I might not have much time." It becomes your quiet mantra. Your speech begins to slur. You learn to speak with your eyes. People lean in now not to interrupt, but to listen. Every sentence costs effort, so each word carries weight. In this strange new gravity, your thoughts sharpen. You see connections others miss. You find elegance where others see chaos. You look into the abyss of your own mortality, and instead of despair, you see structure. One day, you sit in your chair and scribble out a radical idea. Maybe black holes aren't truly black. Maybe just maybe they leak radiation. Maybe even the things we thought were lost forever aren't. The irony isn't lost on you. You, who are slowly collapsing, have discovered that not even black holes can keep everything in. That something, some fragment of energy, some whisper of truth always escapes. You present your early work. The response is quiet at first, then reverent. A few colleagues scoff, others take notes. They watch your body fail, and your mind ignite. And for a moment, no one knows which is more terrifying. The body continues its slow rebellion. You fall more. You tire easily. But the fire inside you, the reason it grows, you're still afraid sometimes. In the quiet moments, when the room is dark and your limbs feel foreign, you worry about your future, about your independence, about being a burden. But you've already made a decision, one no one saw. You won't live according to their timeline. You will not go gently into your 2 years. You're going to stretch them into decades. You're going to prove that the body is not the measure of a man. And that time, though relentless, is not your enemy. it's your canvas. Because somewhere inside, you already suspect the universe has plans for you. And so you whisper a joke one morning while struggling to tie your shirt button. If time has a beginning, maybe I can find it before mine ends. You smile, because you know something most people don't. The universe doesn't always play fair, but sometimes it plays along. You don't hear the word itself when it's first spoken. Not really. It floats in the air like chalk dust, ALS, they say. But you're thinking about entropy, about an unfinished equation, about the way the doctor's mouth moves slower than his words. It's strange you think how a sentence can change everything and still feel like nothing at all when it lands. You're 21. You've just arrived at Cambridge. And instead of feeling like the start of everything, it now feels like a countdown. You try to nod to thank the doctor politely. There's a pause. You reach for the doorknob with hands that now sometimes fumble and turn the world sideways. Outside the office, the sky looks the same as it did before. That's the odd part. You expect it to be darker, redder. You expect thunder, or maybe music, or maybe silence so thick it presses on your ears. But the buses still pass. Pigeons still squabble. Time unfairly keeps moving. You walk home slower than usual. ALS. 2 years, maybe 3. Your muscles will waste. Your voice will vanish. You'll forget how to swallow, how to breathe, and then fade. You tell no one. Not yet. What do you say? I've been given an early exit. The clock is louder now. You don't even tell Jane. Not at first. She notices anyway. She's observant like that. She's patient too. You walk together through Cambridge Gardens, and she doesn't rush your steps. You begin to drift toward the river more often, as if the stillness there can anchor you. You speak of stars and particles of time bending under gravity, but never your own. She knows, though. She holds your hand when it trembles. One day, when you finally tell her, she listens quietly. No gasps, no tears. She just squeezes your hand and says, "Then we better get to work." You fall in love with her completely in that moment. But love doesn't stop time. The decline is subtle but steady. You trip more often now, and your friends stop laughing when you do. You begin needing a walking stick. Then 2. You move from the front row of lectures to the back, where you can leave more easily. You feel your body like a suit that no longer fits, but you wear it anyway because you have no other. Still, your mind sharpens. Strangely, beautifully, sharply. You begin your thesis on singularities, questioning what happens inside black holes, what the universe looked like at time 0. You spend long hours staring at the same equation, letting it stretch and collapse like a star in your thoughts. Your body may be falling inward, but your ideas are expanding outward faster than ever. There's a cruel elegance to it all, your fascination with gravitational collapse, with horizons from which no light escapes, while your own world darkens in parallel. A fellow student asks why you're so interested in the Big Bang. You don't tell them it's because beginnings feel safer than endings. You simply say, "Because I want to know where we came from." You start attending seminars less frequently. Sometimes it's fatigue. Sometimes it's the stare, the one people give when they don't know whether to pity or admire you. You don't like either option, but still they come. They start listening, one by one. Because your thoughts carry gravity, you become more direct in speech, more economical in movement. You say only what needs to be said. You nod more. You smile with your eyes. It's as if your body, in paring itself down, is teaching your voice to become more precise, more essential. Sometimes you make jokes to ease the air. It's all right. I'm a theoretical physicist. I don't need a working body, just a working mind. People laugh, half relieved. You're helping them, you know, helping them feel okay with what they don't understand. Even as you struggle, you offer comfort through curiosity. In the quiet hours, though, the grief creeps in. It arrives not as a wave, but a mist. You look at your hands and wonder how long they will obey you. You trace the edge of your jaw, knowing your mouth will someday fall silent. You wake up some nights, wondering if this is the last morning you'll walk unaided. And yet every day you wake, you still return to the chalkboard, to the notes, to the possibility that even in collapse there's discovery. You remember the dream again, the one where you're floating. Not in fear, but in wonder. The stars drift around you like embers, and though your arms don't move, you feel no weight. Just thought, just clarity. You tell no one about the dream. You simply begin to live like it's real. Jane brings you tea one morning and finds you scribbling notes about space-time curvature. She asks if it's for class. You shake your head. No, it's for everything. And it is. The diagnosis remains. The time still ticks. But something is shifting. You're not just existing anymore. You're becoming. Not less. Not smaller. Not weaker. But something else. Something strange. Something unmeasurable. A singularity, perhaps. You don't expect love to survive illness. Not yours, not anyone's. You assume that when the body weakens, so does everything tethered to it: ambition, dignity, desire. But Jane doesn't seem to have read the same script. She's luminous, yes, not in a showy way, but in the kind of light that stays even after she leaves the room. She walks into your life not like thunder, but like gravity, gentle, steady, inescapable. A family friend at first, then a letter, then tea, then everything. She's studying medieval languages. Her world is cathedrals and manuscripts, candlelight and Latin. Yours is quantum mechanics and event horizons. But somehow, when you talk, the two realms fold into each other. Time stretches. Words fall away. Only meaning remains. You're careful at first. You don't want to trap her in tragedy. You don't want to offer a story with an ending already stamped on the first page. But Jane doesn't flinch. She listens to your theories, your gallows humor, your quiet confessions about fatigue. And she simply nods. She sees the illness. But she also sees the man who says things like, "If I must live with limits, I'll try to stretch what's left beyond them." You don't propose with fanfare. You're practical. You say something like, "Well, since things are uncertain, maybe we shouldn't wait." She says yes, as if she's been waiting all along. You get married on a gray day that somehow feels bright. You wear a suit that doesn't quite fit anymore. You walk a little less confidently now, leaning slightly, but Jane's hand never leaves yours. There's laughter. There's dancing, though you mostly watch. There's cake. Someone plays Bach. You don't remember the speeches, but you remember the way Jane looks at you when everyone else has stopped looking. You move into a small flat together. It creaks in the morning. The kettle whistles like a tired bird. Jane brings you tea while you scribble in notebooks about singularities. She sits beside you and translates Chaucer aloud for fun. Sometimes you read each other lines from entirely different books at the same time. She is not your caretaker. She is your counterpoint. Still, She helps more and more, brushing your coat, tying laces, eventually feeding you on days your hands are too slow. She never makes it feel like charity. She moves with grace as if this were all part of a rhythm only the two of you hear. You laugh together often, especially at dark jokes. Jane loves them maybe too much. What do we call a physicist with ALS efficient? The two of you chuckle until you cough, and she pats your back until your breath returns. There are arguments too, of course. You're not a saint. You're stubborn, sharp-tongued when tired. She's fierce, opinionated, unwilling to be reduced to a nurse. She loves you, but she also insists on being more than just a shadow in your orbit. You admire that. Fiercely. There's a night late heavy rain against the window when she finds you slumped over your desk, too exhausted to move. You've written the same line of math 3 times, each time more jagged. Your hands won't obey. Your breath is shallow. You look at her and whisper, "Maybe I'm not built for this after all." She kneels beside you, not with pity, but with defiance. "Then I'll hold you up while you finish." You kiss her. It's not a dramatic kiss, not cinematic, but it's real awkward, warm, necessary. Over the next few years, your theories gain ground. People take notice. Your work on black holes begins to ripple through the academic world. There's a kind of vindication in it, but also irony. You are slowly collapsing. But your mind is building entire new universes. Jane is there for every step, sometimes literally. She walks beside your wheelchair as it replaces your cane. She adjusts the ramp at home. She manages schedules, raises eyebrows at snide remarks from bureaucrats, and cooks eggs that are always slightly too runny, but you never tell her that. You become a kind of duet. There's a moment small, but etched in memory. She's reading quietly, and you're lost in a scribbled equation. The radio hums. The rain taps the windows like Morse code. Your voice is quieter now, thinner, but you say, "You know, I think I can still see time." She doesn't ask what you mean. She just reaches for your hand and nods. And somehow, in that instant, you feel infinite. It isn't perfect. It never is. But there's something about being loved while falling apart that rewrites your sense of self. You are not a burden. You are a witness, a thinker, a husband, a man still asking the universe for secrets. Love doesn't cure you, but it steadies you. And in the growing silence of your body, that steadiness becomes everything. You once walked beside Jane. Now she walks beside you. A subtle difference perhaps, but one you feel in every turn of the wheels beneath you. The chair arrives quietly. No dramatic moment, no ceremony. Just a delivery, a test, a quiet acknowledgement. This is how you move now. You give it a name, almost jokingly, as if that will make it less alien. But the truth is, it becomes more than a machine. It becomes your vessel, your anchor, your ship. You marry knowledge to machinery. The wheels don't just move you, they carry your mind into the very edge of time. You no longer walk, but you go farther than anyone else dares to think. Jane calls it the miracle chair, sometimes half laughing. You call it necessary. But deep down, you both know it's the boundary line between who you were and who you're becoming. Meanwhile, the world of physics opens wider before you than any staircase you can no longer climb. You sit in dark lecture halls, surrounded by chalk dust and murmuring voices, and you speak. Slowly, precisely. Your breath comes shorter these days, but your mind is sharp like a compass in a hurricane. You say things like, a singularity is not a place, it's a condition. A limit where the known breaks down. Someone in the back writes that down like scripture. You've begun to sound like a prophet even though you still feel like a student. Cambridge shifts around you. Professors start pausing when you enter the room. Not for the chair, for the mind. Your ideas are no longer novelties. They're equations that bend the spine of modern physics. Black holes, event horizons, quantum evaporation. The concept of Hawking radiation begins to shimmer on the horizon of academia. But still, there are evenings when Jane wraps a blanket around your shoulders, when the cold clings to your fingers, and you wonder quietly, secretly, how long you can keep this up. You don't say it aloud. You save those thoughts for the stars. You begin to study them, not just as facts, but as companions. You know now that even light can be trapped. That time slows in the gravity of massive objects. You start to believe, not out of faith, but out of math, that there is more out there than we can see. You imagine the first moment of time, not metaphorically, but literally. A single point, infinitely dense, infinitely small, the origin of everything. You find comfort in it. If the universe had a beginning, maybe your condition isn't a flaw. Maybe it's just another version of collapse leading to creation. Your marriage grows in this strange new gravity. Jane now helps you dress, helps you into bed, lifts your body when it refuses to lift itself. There are bad days when frustration spills over in sharp words or long silences. You are still human. You are still proud. And needing help is a wound that doesn't heal easily. But Jane never makes you feel broken. There is one night, particularly cold, when you both lie awake. The electricity flickers, and your breathing machine clicks unevenly. Jane whispers, "Do you think the universe has a reason?" And you answer without hesitation, "No. But I think it has beauty." That is enough for both of you. Your first child arrives not long after, a son. You hold him carefully, your muscles already beginning to tighten unpredictably. Jane places him in your arms, and for a moment the world narrows to something achingly small and infinitely vast. You do not think about how much time you'll have. You think about how much wonder you can pass on. At lectures, your wheelchair becomes iconic. Students take notes faster when you speak. There's reverence now, but also curiosity. You've become the physicist who challenges assumptions, who defies diagnosis, who says even in the darkest regions of a black hole there may be a faint glow. People begin to quote you, and yet you still laugh at the absurdity of it. You, the boy who couldn't keep neat notes, now stand figuratively, if not literally, as one of the clearest voices in cosmology. You appear at conferences. You write. You speak, though slower now, more mechanically. Your words are precious currency. Each sentence chosen, carefully delivered with the weight of thought behind it. One day, a journalist asks if you're afraid of dying. You pause, then say, "No. But I'm afraid of not understanding the universe before I do." Your face doesn't flinch. But somewhere inside, Jane squeezes your hand even though she's not there. The wheelchair no longer feels like a loss. It feels like an evolution, a necessary adaptation to carry the one thing in you that has never faltered the will to understand. From this chair, you will build new models of time. From this chair, you will show the world that silence is not absence. And from this chair, you will begin to reach for the stars. Your voice was the last part of your body to betray you. At first, it only weakened. Words became slower, blurred at the edges. You began to slur when tired. You had to repeat yourself more than once, sometimes twice, and the effort showed in the lines around your eyes. But for a while you held on, stretching each syllable across time like a thread across a chasm. Then one day, it simply faded. A tracheotomy, necessary to keep you breathing. Necessary, too, to take what remained of your voice. Silence. True silence. Not poetic, not dramatic. Just absence. Not a word, not a sound, not a protest left in your throat. You do not cry. There's no energy for crying. Instead, you lie there in the hospital bed blinking against the sterile lights and wonder how a man who spent his life explaining the universe can now say nothing at all. Jane is there. Always Jane. Holding your hand as the machine breathes for you, as nurses move around like ghosts with clipboards. Your children come quiet and wide-eyed. They're too young to understand what's been taken, but they understand enough to feel the weight of it. And yet even now, you are not defeated. You start with an eyebrow. You blink to indicate yes. You move your cheek muscles to spell out words one letter at a time. It's painstaking, but it works. And in that stubborn flicker of communication, you find a new kind of rhythm. You joke about it, of course. You always do. This is the slowest I've ever spoken in my life. Probably the clearest, too. Then the machine arrives, a speech synthesizer mounted to your wheelchair. Primitive at first. The voice is American flat and robotic, a monotone with no warmth, no nuance. You test it, one button at a time. Words appear on a screen and the machine speaks them aloud. Hello, my name is Stephen Hawking. You pause. The voice is not yours, and yet, somehow, it becomes yours. You refine it, train it, program it to say what matters. You carry it with you like armor. You make people laugh with it. You make them think. You make them listen. One afternoon, a reporter asks why you haven't updated the voice to something more modern, more British perhaps. You respond in that synthesized monotone. My voice is distinctive. I wouldn't want to lose that. And you mean it, because it's not just a machine anymore. It's your identity, your way back into the world, your chosen instrument for bending silence into meaning. Children begin to mimic it playfully. Animators borrow it. Filmmakers invite you to cameo not out of pity, but because you've become something few scientists ever become instantly recognizable. Iconic. The voice is slow, yes, but it gives you time to think, to choose your words, to make every sentence matter. Jane watches this evolution with a mixture of awe and fatigue. The days are longer now. You need more help. Nurses, assistant schedules. Jane manages it all, though the strain begins to show in the corners of her smile. You pretend not to notice, but you do. And still through it all, you teach. You lecture via computer, via screen, via blinking cursors and synthetic vowels. Students line up to hear you, not out of obligation, but out of hunger. They know this is something rare, a mind undiminished speaking through the cracks of mortality. You write a book, not a paper, not a thesis. A book for everyone. For the curious and the confused. For the ones who never thought they'd understand physics. A brief history of time. You dictate it slowly, over months, over years, paragraph by paragraph. You choose words not only for clarity, but for elegance. You explain the Big Bang black holes, quantum uncertainty, all without equations. Just metaphors, images, rhythm. Publishers warn you, it's too abstract, too complex. You shrug. It sells millions. Suddenly, you're not just a physicist. You're a philosopher in a wheelchair, a pop culture paradox. a symbol. And though you never asked for it, you accept it because it means your voice, your real voice, is being heard. TV crews set up cameras. Documentaries are filmed. You speak at the Vatican, at Oxford, at NASA, all from the same chair, all with the same machine. Sometimes you miss your old voice, the texture of it, the timing, the jokes that worked better when you could raise an eyebrow in sync. But then you remember you're still speaking. And in a way, more people hear you now than ever would have before. One night while watching a documentary about yourself, something you rarely do, you hear the synthesized voice describe entropy. You hear it say, intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. You smile, because it sounds like something you'd say, because it was something you said, and you realize the voice came from wires, but the soul behind it, that's always been yours. You've always loved paradoxes, the places where reason unravels and reality reveals its seams. You've spent your life chasing the edges of space of time of understanding itself. But now, you're staring into the most elegant paradox of all, a place where everything collapses and somehow something is still left. Black holes. They are terrifying to most people. The name alone suggests ruin. Devouring voids where light itself is caught and swallowed whole. But to you, they are poetry. They are the punctuation marks of the cosmos' dense final mysterious. You sit in your chair, voice box, humming faintly, and explain it to students. A black hole is not empty. It is full of questions, and that's what you live for. The idea grips you like gravity. Not just collapse, but transformation. What happens when the laws of physics fall apart? When time and space fold in on themselves like paper in flame? Your colleagues are skeptical. At first, the standard view holds black holes are black. Nothing escapes. Nothing returns. They are endpoints. But you still blinking words letter by letter say no. You suggest that black holes might emit radiation, that they might not be eternal prisons but leaky containers shedding bits of themselves over time. Slowly, quietly, eventually vanishing into nothing. Hawking radiation. The idea is radical, daring. It blends quantum mechanics with general relativity, two worlds that traditionally don't speak to each other. And here you are, synthesizing them with a voice not even your own. It takes time, but it changes everything. People start to see it. They publish papers. They debate it fiercely in hallways and in journals. You watch from your chair, unmoving, as your mind moves the landscape of physics itself. You become known for this equation, your own version of Einstein's E to MC2, a formula etched into stone, literal and symbolic, on the walls of lecture halls. But even more than the science people remember, the way you described it, black holes are not the end. They are not the absolute erasure we once thought. Information may not be lost, and that matters. It matters deeply. Because if information can survive even at the edge of total collapse, maybe so can you. You tell this to Jane one evening as she closes a window against the cold. She smiles, tired but kind. You mean to tell me, she says, that even the darkest thing in the universe still glows? You blink twice. Yes, you begin to see black holes as more than scientific phenomena. They're metaphors now. Mirrors. You too are collapsing physically, slowly, relentlessly. But inside, there is light, thought, movement, and paradoxically freedom. This paradox becomes your sanctuary. You travel the world now despite your chair. despite the machines. You lecture in Japan, in America, in Europe. Crowds gather not just for what you say, but for the way you exist. Quietly, fiercely, unapologetically defiant of every expectation placed upon you. Airplanes are difficult. Hotels, even more so. But you don't complain. Not publicly. There's always a part of you watching the absurdity of it all like a cosmic joke being written in real time. You tell a reporter, once, "My goal is simple. It is complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is, and why it exists at all." They quote it everywhere. You meet other scientists, rival minds, friends. Some challenge your work. Some challenge your presence. One famously bets you that black holes do not emit radiation. You accept the wager and win decades later. A signed copy of Playboy changes hands. You both laugh. Science, after all, is a deeply human game. And yet you never lose the quiet sense of awe, the childlike wonder behind the machinery. You still pause when discussing entropy. You still frown slightly when considering what happens after the collapse. Sometimes, late at night, you sit alone. Jane already asleep, the house quiet except for the soft whir of machines, and think about the edge, the event horizon, that line in space beyond which nothing returns. And you ask yourself, is there one inside us too? Is there a line, a moment, where we stop being ourselves? You blink once, no. You believe in continuity, even through change, even through suffering, even through death. One morning, a student asks you what gives your life meaning. You write carefully, deliberately, the universe does not owe us meaning. We must create it and share it. They nod, but you wonder if they understand. Because meaning is not a gift, it's a labor, and black holes taught you that. Collapse is not always destruction. Sometimes it's the only way to make something new. You say this again and again in books, in speeches, in interviews. Not always in those exact words, but always in that tone, that soft, calm certainty, that silence is never the same after it's been named. And all the while the world listens. Because you, Stephen Hawking, became the light from the black hole. Not despite your collapse, but because of it. You never planned to become a father. Not because you didn't want to, but because long ago, someone in a white coat gave you 2 years to live. And yet, here you are. Years later. Decades later. Sitting in a soft chair machine, humming beside you, holding your infant son like a question no theory can answer. His name is Robert. He stares up at you, with eyes not yet shaped by logic or gravity, only curiosity. You don't have the strength to lift him high, but you can cradle him in your lap. And that's enough. More than enough. You look into his tiny face and realize something no textbook ever taught you. This warm, breathing bundle of possibility is a kind of singularity too. A place where time, meaning, and consequence all bend inward. You become a father, quietly, methodically. Not the kind who wrestles in the backyard or teaches bike riding, but the kind who tells bedtime stories about entropy, who uses a speech synthesizer to explain why the moon doesn't fall. And they listen. All your children, Robert Lucy and later Timothy, learn early to hear the rhythm of your voice, not in its tone, but in its intention. That synthetic robotic cadence becomes a lullaby, a compass, a wall clock, ticking gently in the background of their lives. Jane is brilliant through it all, fierce, patient, sometimes exhausted, but never absent. She wakes up before dawn, manages the schedules, prepares your lectures, packs lunches, changes diapers, lifts your body in and out of the chair, raises 3 children, and a world-changing scientist at the same time. People call you remarkable, but privately, you know what she is. You try not to let the chair define your parenting. You insist on being present at school events, on using your computer to read bedtime stories, on showing up for life, even when your body begs for rest. You make up jokes at breakfast. What did the photon say when asked if it needed luggage? No thanks, I'm traveling light. Your children laugh because they know when dad makes a physics joke, it's going to be terrible and wonderful. But there are moments of tension, of doubt. Being a father from a chair is not the same as being a father from the field. You can't always chase after them. You can't always hold them close in the way they need. You begin to feel something new: guilt. You wonder if your children will grow up resenting the machines, the assistants, the space you take up in the room just by surviving. You see it in Robert sometimes, a flicker of frustration, of distance. You understand it. You forgive it. But it still hurts. There are days Jane can't carry the weight anymore. Not just of your body, but of the life you've built. She begins to carve out a corner of the world just for herself. Music, faith, friendship. You don't stop her. You can't. You both change slowly. You're still companions, still tethered. But the marriage becomes more functional than romantic, more partnership than passion. It's no one's fault. Just time entropy drift. Still, the family holds. You are not a perfect father. You are not always present, not always easy to live with. You can be stubborn, aloof, consumed by thought. Your mind is often in galaxies, while your children are in the living room, shouting about broken crayons. But you love them, fiercely, quietly, in your own way, and they know. Lucy brings you tea one afternoon, carefully balanced in her small hands. She's 6. She says, "Daddy, do you think black holes are like hiding places for lost stars?" You blink once, pause, then type, "I think sometimes yes." But the stars are never truly gone. You don't say it, but you're thinking about yourself. Your children grow up in a house filled with paradox, science, and silence machines, and music, pain, and joy. They learn to measure love, not in hugs, but in presence. Not in how loud a father speaks, but in whether he listens. You try to be there for them, not just in their childhood, but in their questions. When Robert asks you about God, when Lucy brings home a poem, when Timothy wants to know how the universe could have come from nothing, you're not always wise, but you always try to be honest. One night, Lucy asks, "Daddy, are you afraid of not being here one day?" You pause, then type, "No, I am afraid of not saying enough before I go." And that is the truth. Your children grow taller, you grow quieter. But there is a gravity between you that never fades. A pull, invisible, but undeniable. You orbit each other sometimes, distant, sometimes close, but always bound. Years later, when they speak about you, they don't talk about the wheelchair first, or the machines, or the books. They talk about the questions you asked them, the attention you gave, the jokes, the patience, the paradoxes. You taught them that a body can fail, but a mind can shine. That a whisper, when it's true, can echo louder than a shout. You taught them that love doesn't always need footsteps to arrive. It starts gradually, like most irreversible things do. At first, it's a single interview, then a newspaper feature, then a BBC special. The boy with the countdown who refused to stop ticking. The mind in the chair, the man who speaks in code but makes the world listen. You are no longer just Stephen Hawking. You are Stephen Hawking emphasis pause mythos. Your voice artificial distinct becomes a kind of signature across media, echoing from televisions, radios, and cassette tapes. People quote you without reading the full paper. They wear t-shirts with black holes printed across them with your silhouette staring upward. It is flattering. It is surreal. It is exhausting. You do not seek it out, but neither do you refuse it. Because fame, for all its distortions, is a vector. It points outward. It carries ideas. And you've spent your entire life trying to get people to look past their lives and into the stars. Still, it shifts something inside you. The questions you receive begin to change. No longer just about radiation or entropy. Now they ask what your favorite color is, what you think of aliens, whether time travel will be available by Christmas. You smile digitally mechanically and answer with charm, always dry, always a little bit annoyed. Time travel. I've tried it. But I ended up exactly where I started. They laugh. You smile again. But it lingers the fear that the machine is becoming the man, that the voice, the chair, the symbol, the silhouette are speaking louder than the physics. Jane sees it too. Your lectures grow more crowded. Paparazzi begin waiting outside Cambridge halls. Assistants must be hired, then scheduled, then managed. The house no longer echoes with only your children's voices, but with the shuffle of strangers. Jane holds it together for years, but slowly, subtly, her spirit begins to fray. She's never been just your wife. She is Jane, fierce, independent, brilliant. But the world doesn't see that. They call her Mrs. Hawking and ask what it's like to care for a genius. They don't ask about her music, her dreams, her nights of isolation, when your breathing machine whines in the dark. You see her dim sometimes, and you hate yourself for it. There are arguments, small at first, then sharper. Not cruel, never cruel, just tired, just worn. Two people trying to do the work of 10 caring love like a shared equation with too many unknowns. But still there is the work. You publish more, speak more, travel more. Presidents ask to meet you. Filmmakers invite you to consult. There's even a cartoon, The Simpsons, where you're drawn with exaggerated glasses and the eternal smirk. You love it more than you should. Not because it's accurate, but because it's absurd. And absurdity has always been your comfort zone. Behind closed doors, though, you begin to wonder, is the idea of you more powerful than the you behind the idea? You roll through hotel corridors on tour. You give lectures to audiences who applaud before you speak. You appear at conferences where no one challenges you anymore. Not because they agree, but because they're intimidated. And that's not science. That's theater. The fear grows quietly. That you're being preserved, admired, projected, but not truly seen. One night after a particularly grand award ceremony, you return to your hotel and stare at your reflection. You haven't looked in a mirror for longer than a second in years. But now you do. And the man looking back is part machine, part memory, part story. Your face hasn't changed much. ALS doesn't do that, but something else has. There's gravity here, the kind you can't calculate. You miss the early days. Not the illness, not the pain, but the clarity, when all that mattered was the equation, the line, the moment of insight that felt like creation. You wonder, can a symbol still wonder? Or does it merely perform? And yet, you press on, because there is still wonder, still joy, Still late nights at the computer with a student beside you excitedly mispronouncing thermodynamics. Still moments of insight when two stubborn ideas finally click together like cosmic gears. You live for those moments, and you remind yourself fame may distort, but it also opens doors. You use it. You publish the universe in a nutshell. You speak about philosophy. You question determinism. You debate God, not as a theologian, but as a physicist, willing to ask unanswerable questions. You continue to laugh at the madness of your own public image. Next, they'll put me on a coin, you say once. You were half joking. They eventually do. And beneath all the attention, all the flashing cameras, all the manufactured awe, you hold tight to one simple truth. You are still that boy staring at the stars through a bedroom window, wondering why. And as long as that question remains, you remain. Not a symbol, not a myth, just Stephen. Still reaching. Retirement has never appealed to you. Not because you're a workaholic, though people assume that. Not because you're afraid of slowing down. You've been slowing down physically for decades. No. You keep working because your mind is still a cathedral, with doors uncounted, with new rooms appearing each year. You keep working because the questions have never stopped echoing, and silence to you is only tolerable when it's filled with thought. And maybe most honestly of all, you keep working because stopping would feel too much like surrender. Your body is now almost entirely still. You cannot move your arms or legs. You cannot speak without the help of your computerized voice. But your gaze is as sharp as ever. Your will, indestructible. Most people, when they speak of courage, picture battlefield charges or mountaintop flags. Your courage is the courage of continuation, of waking each day into stillness and choosing to think anyway. Students gather around your office door like pilgrims. They come from different countries, different disciplines. Some want to solve equations. Some want your autograph. Some just want to sit in a room where defiance lives. You listen to them all. You blink through lectures. You nod or interrupt via keystroke. You build questions into the conversation like traps gentle ones spring-loaded with wonder. You tell jokes about the expanding universe. I don't know if it's expanding or just getting tired of holding everything in. They laugh nervously, but they stay. They always stay. Your office is cluttered with paper, notebooks, models, coffee mugs that Jane insists on rotating out, though you're convinced one of them is lucky. There's a stack of unread books next to your chair. There's an assistant flipping through your calendar, a student sketching out equations on a whiteboard, and always a quiet hum of possibility in the air. And through it all, you keep writing. You publish. You refine your theories. You revise your earlier positions, not with embarrassment, but with pride. After all, in science, the only unforgivable sin is refusing to change your mind. You begin to speak more openly about things people never expected: love, death, God, time. You do not give answers. You ask better questions. You participate in conferences on artificial intelligence, on the fate of the cosmos, on the ethics of future technology. People introduce you with phrases like the voice of our time, and you nod with polite detachment. You're more interested in what comes after the applause, and yet the world grows louder. Your name appears in headlines and movie credits and music lyrics. There's a film being made about you now, about your life with Jane, about the way a man facing death built a legacy instead. You are hesitant, flattered, yes, but also unsure. How can a film capture everything? How can it contain the quiet terror of diagnosis, the slow evolution of thought, the way love shifts from passion to partnership? But you watch it, the theory of everything. You smile at some parts, wince at others. You say in your synthesized voice, "It's close, but my real story is longer." And it is, because even now, especially now, you are not done. Your muscles may be silent, but your brain is still running at light speed. You begin writing your memoir, My Brief History. You strip it down, minimalist, lean, unsentimental, just enough scaffolding to hold the memories in place. You do not embellish. You simply present the facts, then leave space for readers to wonder. You continue collaborating with other scientists, with students, even with artists. You lend your voice to animated features. You appear in parodies. You make jokes on late-night shows. And each time someone says, "Surely, you'll retire soon," you blink once. No. Because retirement implies you've reached the edge, that there's nothing left to explore. And you know better than anyone that the edge is always moving. Even as your health falters more, even as hospital visits grow frequent, even as your voice box occasionally misfires and the assistants grow tired and Jane drifts further into her own life. Still, you show up. One morning, a new student arrives. Nervous, eager. You ask them what they want from the universe. They stammer something about understanding dark energy. You smile, then type, "Slowly, start with light." It's easier to lose. The student doesn't understand. Not yet. But one day, they will. Because you've become not just a teacher of equations, but of persistence, of clarity, of how to live when living no longer looks like what others imagine. And though the chair creaks now, though the wires sometimes tangle, though your body sits quiet as the years close around you, your mind remains bright, rebellious, unretired. From the outside, your life looks almost serene. You are a man of science, a symbol of persistence, a thinker who's transcended the limits of his body. People see the polished exterior, the awards, the standing ovations, the televised interviews. They see the legend in the wheelchair and assume peace followed purpose. But they don't see the quiet wars, not the ones with others, the ones with yourself. You wake each morning not to stretch, but to be stretched, to be lifted, dressed, rotated, arranged. Your days begin with someone else's hands. Your privacy has been reduced to a schedule, and sometimes the dignity of independence feels like a memory from a former body. You don't complain. You rarely do. But some mornings, when the nurse adjusts your collar too tightly, or when the voice box needs rebooting, something clenches inside you. A kind of invisible scream you've trained yourself never to let out. You are human. You are brilliant. You are tired. The marriage too begins to strain. Jane is still there always, but differently. Her warmth remains, but her world has grown wider. She sings again. She travels. She finds companionship elsewhere. You do not stop her. You do not blame her. But you feel the echo of absence even when she's in the room. It isn't betrayal. It's entropy. Everything drifts. Even the people who once orbited you most closely. You have new caretakers now. New assistants. Some stay for years, others for weeks. They become your arms, your legs, your voice, your shield. You depend on them utterly, and sometimes that dependence wears thin. There are moments when you want to shout, not about science, but about socks, or buttons, or the indignity of being fed mashed bananas by someone 20 years younger who doesn't understand that you are still you beneath the silence. You learn patience the way others learn languages, slowly, with error and under pressure. And still, you keep working. Because while the world praises your courage, you know this is not about courage. It's about discipline. The discipline to live through days where nothing works, where your body is a puzzle missing most of its pieces, where even blinking feels like resistance training. And on those days, when the world feels too loud and too far away, you turn inward to numbers, to theorems, to the calm, cold logic of the cosmos, because physics never pities you. Physics doesn't care if you're in a chair, doesn't slow down when your lungs are weak, doesn't soften its edges for your story. And that, in some strange way, is mercy. You face new professional wars, too. Your theories are challenged by younger physicists, and some find holes in your models. There's disagreement over your later work. You lose debates. You revise ideas, but you don't hide. You answer critics with papers, not pride, with typed sentences that take hours to compose but arrive sharper than scalpels. We must be willing to abandon what no longer fits you once say. And you live by that. You don't crave to be right forever. You crave to understand. There are nights, late ones after lectures or interviews, when you stare up at the ceiling and wonder if people would still listen if you weren't in a chair. If the mythology faded, would the ideas still hold? Then the pain starts again. Stiffness, spasticity, tremors, and you close your eyes and let the thoughts carry you outward into the void, away from the noise. You think about information, about whether anything is ever truly lost. You wonder if your life compressed into these decades of words and work and equations will outlast your body. You suspect yes. You hope yes. One afternoon, you watch your son playing chess with one of your graduate students. You can't move the pieces, but you watch each one shift across the board like planets in orbit. Strategy, silence, calculation. You smile. Because life, too, has been a game of anticipation, of limitation, and you've learned to win by waiting. In interviews, people ask what keeps you going. You answer simply, curiosity. But that's only part of it. What keeps you going is resistance, not loud, not violent, but constant. The quiet rebellion of waking up again, of speaking through machines, of arguing with physicists and entropy in equal measure. The quiet wars never make headlines, but they are the ones that define you. And they are the ones you win every single day. You've spent your entire life asking questions, but now the questions start asking you. They rise not from your papers or lectures, but from within, quietly, persistently, like background radiation, always there even when unobserved. What happens when time stops? Where does consciousness go when the voice falls silent? Is there such a thing as a final thought? You never feared death, but you do fear incompletion, that there will be a question left unanswered, a theory that slips just beyond reach, a sentence that dies mid-keystroke. You think about it more often now, not morbidly, clinically, like a physicist tracing the curve of a decaying particle. You begin to talk openly, publicly about the end of time. Not just your time, but all time. You speak of the heat death of the universe, of the slow fade, of light of the cosmic horizon, receding ever outward. Some find it terrifying. You find it beautiful, not because it's gentle, but because it's truthful. Truth to you has always been sacred. Whether it's hopeful or harsh doesn't matter. What matters is that it's real. And reality, for all its indifference, has always given you more than it took. Your theories grow more daring in your final years. You begin to propose answers to the biggest questions. How did the universe begin? What came before the Big Bang? Could the laws of physics evolve? Some critics push back. Some call your ideas too speculative. But you smile because speculation, when done with rigor, is not weakness. It's courage. You propose a theory of imaginary time, a model in which the universe has no boundary, no before, no edge. Just a seamless fabric curved like the earth with no starting point and no end. People struggle to understand it, so you explain it with kindness. Asking what came before the Big Bang is like asking what's north of the North Pole. They nod slowly. The metaphor lands. You become not just a physicist now, but a guide. A voice for the intellectually curious and the spiritually lost. You speak at conferences filled with theologians. You are invited to speak at the Vatican. You discuss God not to affirm or deny, but to interrogate, to explore the space between certainty and wonder. You say, it is not necessary to invoke God to explain the universe, but that does not make the universe any less miraculous. People quote, you tweet, you etch your words onto plaques, but you never say them for the legacy. You say them because they matter to you. Meanwhile, the body continues its silent retreat. You now control your speech device with a single cheek muscle. One twitch. One sentence. One line of thought painstakingly composed. It takes time, but time, you've learned, is a tool measured not in minutes, but in meaning. You write more books. You collaborate with others. You explore multiverse theories. The possibility that ours is but one of countless timelines, each with different laws, different outcomes. You wonder, is there a version of you who never got sick, who walks freely, who lectures with his own voice? You blink once, maybe, but then you turn to Jane or to your children, or to a student asking you to sign a textbook, and you blink again, no. Because this version of you is real. And this life, though harder, is not lesser. You've lived more in a single decade than most do in a lifetime. You once said one should not complain about life. After all, life is what enables you to complain. And even now, as your lungs tire, you find yourself smiling at that truth. You are invited to give the Wreath Lectures for the BBC. You accept. Your topic, black holes. You begin with humor, as always. Can you hear me? The audience laughs. Then you take them on a journey through the physics of collapse, the mathematics of time, the philosophy of information. You conclude with a message not of despair, but of resilience. If you feel like you are in a black hole, don't give up. There is a way out. The room goes silent. Then applause, thunderous, rising, aching with reverence. That night, as the crowd disperses and your assistant pushes your chair quietly through the back corridors, you feel something not quite satisfaction, not quite peace, but something close. You've done what you came to do. You've made the darkness glow. You've made silence speak. You've made the questions louder, so loud, in fact, that they echo in minds across the world. And still you wonder, is there something on the other side of death? A continuation? A reset? Or is it just silence, final, soft, still? You don't know. You never claimed to. But you know this. Even if the mind stops the questions, keep traveling. They pass through others. They evolve. They replicate. Just like light passing through the edge of a black hole. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need to answer the final questions. Maybe asking them was always the point. You do not vanish with a bang. There is no cosmic punctuation at the end of your life. No grand moment, no final equation dropped like thunder. You simply fade quietly, like background radiation, like the last warmth from a star gone dark. By now, your name has entered orbit, not just in science, but in literature, art politics, classrooms, cartoons. There are murals of you on city walls, a children's book bearing your face, a conference room on the International Space Station named in your honor. Your body is brittle. Your voice is slower than ever, each word an act of endurance. But your mind impossibly still hums. You continue writing even as your fingers cannot. You continue thinking even as your body offers less and less. The blinking system that allows you to communicate is painfully slow now, but you press on. Sentence by sentence, thought by thought. You tell your assistants with dry precision, I may not speak quickly, but I think faster than ever. And it's true. You know you are nearing the end. You've outlived every prediction, every deadline, every prognosis. Time itself, the thing you spent your life trying to understand, has offered you more than anyone expected. And so you begin to say goodbye, not in speeches or grand letters, but in moments. You give a final public lecture delivered via recorded message. You speak of time of black holes of hope. You say, remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. The audience stands in silence. Some cry, others nod. You are no longer just a scientist to them. You are a mirror showing them what is possible when the mind refuses to quit. At home, you are surrounded by your children, your grandchildren, your caregivers. Jane visits often. The past between you no longer matters. What remains is respect. And something quieter. Something like love, softened by distance and time. You ask to be wheeled outside more often now. Into the garden. Into the starlight. You gaze up with the same question in your heart that lived there at age 10. What else is there? You never stopped asking. The night sky becomes your cathedral again. The chirr of insects, the distant hum of city light, the breeze. These are your choir. And in those hours wrapped in blankets and wonder, you begin to let go. You do not speak of fear, not even to your closest friends. Instead, you ask them about their projects, their children, the next paper they're writing. You offer them ideas gently, like sparks from a fire already going out. You send off final edits to your last book, brief answers to the big questions. You do not know it will be published after your death, but perhaps part of you suspects, because each chapter reads like a farewell, a message in a bottle, a lighthouse across the void. You ask in its pages, is there a God? Will artificial intelligence destroy us? Can humanity survive? Should we colonize space? And through it all, one constant refrain. The future depends on our courage to ask the right questions. Then quietly, imperceptibly, you begin to withdraw. Fewer visitors, fewer emails. You still smile, still blink your answers, but your energy wanes. And one morning, when your nurse arrives and calls your name, there is only stillness. March 14th, 2018. The date carries a strange poetry, Albert Einstein's birthday. You leave the world wrapped in symbolic symmetry, as though time itself arranged the calendar just so. No alarms ring. No black holes form. The universe outwardly continues as always. But something changes. The news spreads. The headlines pour in. Stephen Hawking has died, but the word died feels wrong, inadequate, because you do not vanish. You radiate through books, through ideas, through students who now teach in your name, through children who look at the stars with new questions because of you. Your ashes are interred in Westminster Abbey beside Newton and Darwin, a resting place that feels like a constellation drawn in stone. And as your tomb is sealed, the words carved beneath echo with reverence. Here lies what was mortal of Stephen Hawking. But we know the truth. What was mortal, yes. But what mattered was never bound by the body. You became a farewell, written not in ink, but in the very fabric of space. A whisper stretched across time, a signal still traveling outward, still expanding, like light escaping a black hole after all. You never took the usual path. Not in life, not in learning, not in legend. While others moved through the world with steps and strides, you moved with thought, with sheer will, with questions that didn't need legs to chase. Your journey was not made in motion, but in momentum. Not in distance, but in depth. You taught us that time could bend, that silence could speak, that the human spirit stripped of its body could still sing. And now, long after your final breath, the echoes of that song are still traveling. Children in classrooms draw galaxies and write your name beside them. Scientists run simulations on supercomputers, refining theories you once proposed with nothing but pencil and patience. Filmmakers whisper about time travel, and your synthesized voice is still sampled in their soundtracks. You've become more than memory. You've become metaphor. The boy who was told he had 2 years to live, who instead lived 5 decades longer. The man whose limbs froze but whose imagination exploded like a star. The thinker who stared into the abyss and found not terror, but curiosity. You did not walk. You did not run. But you traveled farther than almost anyone who ever lived. And you left trails. Not behind you, but around us. In the way we now speak about time, not as a straight line, but as something curved and malleable. In the way we understand black holes not as devourers, but as gateways. In the way we think about disability, not as absence, but as a different kind of power. You showed us that the edges of the universe are not the end, but the beginning of something else. That when everything collapses, light may still escape. Your journey was full of paradoxes. You made people laugh while discussing entropy. You inspired hope by speaking of the cold death of the cosmos. You became immortal by confronting mortality daily. And in doing so, you redefined what it means to live as a question, to live without retreat, to live as if every breath, every blink, every joke and equation could still shift the balance of understanding. And it did. Now your voice lives in machines, but also in memory. Your thoughts float in the cloud, not digital, but human. Your life sits not on a pedestal, but at the very center of what it means to endure and to matter. We still feel you when we talk about time. Still see you when we look up at the stars and whisper, why? Because in the end, you were never trying to be extraordinary. You were simply trying to understand. And through that quiet pursuit, you became something extraordinary indeed. Not because of your illness, not because of your chair, not even because of your brilliance, but because you refused to stop, and that refusal carried you across the entire fabric of space without ever needing to take a single step. Your journey was one without footsteps, but not without direction, not without force, not without meaning. and it carries on long after the body rests, because journeys like yours never end. And now, as our story settles into stillness, let your breath grow softer. Let the questions dim, like distant stars blinking out behind morning's haze. Stephen's journey was not loud. It was not fast, but it was deep, profound in its patience, dazzling in its persistence. A voyage taken without footsteps, carried by thought alone. So much of life is measured in motion, in miles walked, ladders climbed, battles won. But his legacy reminds us that movement can take many forms, that stillness is not stagnation, that a quiet mind, when lit by curiosity, can travel farther than any feet could follow. You don't need to solve the mysteries of the cosmos to carry a piece of his story. You just need to look up more often, to wonder without needing an answer, to ask even when it's difficult, to continue, especially when it's difficult. Let those lessons settle now. Let them wrap around you like starlight, gentle, distant, real. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and imagine yourself drifting through space, not lost, but calmly orbiting a center you don't need to see to trust, like gravity, like time, like the quiet certainty that there is always more to understand. Thank you for being here tonight. You could have filled your head with noise, with news, with rush and flash, but instead you chose to slow down, to listen, to reflect, to let one extraordinary mind guide you gently to sleep. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope peace finds you. And if you dream tonight, may it be of stars and soft laughter and the voice of the universe speaking gently in your own. Good night.